with another great episode. A new friend of mine and published poet, Mallory Nygard. Had a great conversation with her. It was great getting to know her a bit and hearing about her journey. So I hope you enjoy. As always, if you would like to be on the show or you are curious about spiritual direction, contact me at seekingourspirit@gmail.com. As always, hit the like button, the share button, the subscribe button, support button, all those good things. And would love to have you guys on the show. Hope you enjoy. All right, rolling, Miss Mallory. Good to have you with me, and thanks for jumping in on this journey with me. We were talking a little bit, I think, through email about whether or not we had ever met before. I don't know that we have.
I don't think so, actually.
Yes.
Maybe just briefly at the wedding.
Maybe at the wedding.
But I don't, like maybe during the wedding.
Maybe,
I don't think
perhaps,
it was during.
Perhaps. Yeah. So, even larger thank you for coming along this journey with someone you don't know. Happened through our mutual friend, William Simmerly, who thought that you would be a great guest. So I'm excited to have you, and I appreciate you coming on. Yeah. Why don't you start by just telling listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, what you do, all that.
Sure. So I'm Mallory Nygard. I've been in Knoxville. This is my 5th year here. I'm a librarian at a Catholic elementary school. So I work mostly with kids all day trying to find books that they like to read or that they might be willing to try. I moved from Knoxville from Indiana, where I did my grad school work in library sciences. But I grew up originally in North Dakota, in a small town, sort of in the middle of nowhere, and lived there, like born and raised there, grew up there.
What town is that?
Williston, North Dakota. Now it's an oil town, but it wasn't really when I was growing up. It was just a quiet little place, kind of in the middle of nowhere.
What interesting.
Yeah, it was a great place to grow up, but I was also kind of ready to leave, So I did my undergrad in Washington, D.C. at the Catholic University of America out there. Which was a great experience. Mm-hmm. But, and that's sort of the backwards version of how I got
here. And you said 3 years here now?
This is my 5th year. So 4. Okay, so I've been here 4 years.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. So purpose of this show, obviously we are exploring what this big broad word spirituality means to different people and sort of looking at that through different lenses. And so as you think about spirituality in your life and what that journey has looked like, where do you sort of enter into that? And to like, was there a moment that you were sort of like, God, or like, have you just always sort of been aware of this higher power in your life, or?
It's so strange to be thinking sort of like backwards at it, because I did like I'm Roman Catholic and I grew up in the church, and there wasn't a part of my life that wasn't in some way, a little bit at least, connected to the church.
To the church,
yeah. Like I went to a Catholic elementary school in town, and even after, like when I went to public middle school and high school, even all of that was still filtered through that lens in some way. And my parents, I think, were really great about initiating a lot of conversations about that. But then also like not going too far. Like I think it's possible to like over spiritualize things.
Sure. You mean like sort of put your own understanding and influence on, like, say, your
or
child.
like use spiritual language in like an aggressive way, or like more as a weapon than as like a tool. And I think my parents did a great job of not doing that.
Okay, cool.
And so when I sort of like went to college, there wasn't, I didn't feel like I had a lot to I guess like unpack. Like I was still curious.
Have a bunch of religious baggage.
Yeah. And I don't think anyone sort of gets away with a religious childhood without something to unpack. But I don't. But yeah, like I feel for the most part it was really like a very positive thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like you're saying that you would say you had a spiritual life, but it was mainly through the church.
Yeah.
Or would you have any separation in that? Like, were you praying as a child, or did you, at home, did you have practices, anything like that?
Yeah, I think like it was sort of yes. That's a good question, because I think when I think about praying as a child, it was mostly like it wasn't a lot of personal prayer,
Yeah.
which I think sort of makes sense for somebody who grew up in the Catholic Church. Like we said the rosary pretty often, or at least like part of the rosary most nights, kind of thing. And I didn't really, I want to say, like, discover personal prayer until much later.
Okay.
And I'm grateful for that, like, foundation of, like, yeah, there's, like, some prayers in my pocket that I can pull out and, like,
if I need them.
Yeah, yeah, that I don't have to, like, do the emotional work of, like, what do I actually... but I now have, like, I think a richer, like, practice.
Yeah.
Than just... Like, I think the liturgy is really great. I'll just say for me, was really great for me as a kid.
Yeah.
The, like, repetitiveness, and to, like, know what to expect every time. Oh, that was so good for me. I love that.
It's something that comes up a lot in conversations that I have, with anybody from a liturgical background, but we talk about a lot in the Episcopal Church of, I think sometimes, I don't know if you would agree with any of this, but I think sometimes folks that don't come from a liturgical background can view liturgical churches as, like, they'll sometimes criticize them as, like, rote or, like, not heartfelt or
like, why aren't you, like, participating in it?
Ritualistic, right? And they do that with a critical lens, and yet for me, I think what I see over and over again with people, and it was my experience growing up in the Episcopal Church, of, like, there's something about that, the liturgy. I guess the analogy for me would be like, if you have a personal prayer practice, if you have, whether it's meditation or whatever it is, that the discipline part of it is what frees you.
Exactly.
Right? So like the liturgy being this repetitive thing that you know so well ends up being meditative, because you can let go in it, You don't even necessarily have to be consciously.
Yeah, there is, like, the freedom in it of, like, I know exactly what's going to happen. And there's such a reassurance for me in that of, like, yeah, like, I don't, like, me being here is a gift and a choice. It's not something that, like, I like, if I don't do this, then it's not going to happen. Yeah. The liturgy is happening whether or not I'm paying attention, whether or not I'm, like, deeply engaged. And some days, like, I need that. Some days I just need to, like, step into the river and let it take me and just, like, ride the waves. Yeah. But then it also, like, because I am so sure in that, then I feel very free to be able to say, like, okay, what else should I be open to? What else is there for me to discover here?
I'd say that's a huge blessing that you're able to approach corporate worship, liturgy, without that sort of should, right? That guilt part, because a lot of people, that's their motivation. Yeah. Right? I should do, they hear their mom's voice or whatever, right? Like, I should be doing this, right? Yeah. So that's a wonderful blessing.
Yeah.
So back to life, so would you name anything? Because you sort of mentioned, like, you got that richer prayer life later. So in childhood, are there any touchstones, any spiritual, moments, quote unquote, that you would just name? Yeah,
there's a couple, which feels like very Catholic to say, but I at the elementary school I went to, was attached to the parish, and once you learned how to be an altar server, they would occasionally pull you to go serve funerals, just like during the school day. And so I think we learned how to be altar servers in maybe 4th grade. So 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, pretty much whenever they could say, hey, like come for an hour and go do this. So I served a lot of funerals in elementary school. And when I look back at it, like that was so beautiful because like when you see the same funeral liturgy over and over again with these like different people coming in and out, like I felt this sense of like connection, I guess, of like, man, like no matter what, the same things are being said about like how beautiful life is and how this is like a transition step, it's like it's an ending, but it is also a beginning. And like that no matter what you did in your life, like this is like you are loved at the moment of your death. And that was so good for me to sort of like repeatedly hear and like bring into myself and be like, man, this is the real thing. That's really beautiful. I hadn't ever thought about that. Like I don't have the same access to like acolytes or servers, right? So like, and I would even have to think about how young I might have been when I served at a funeral, but I definitely didn't have that repetition. Yeah, I could see that being super powerful. Yeah, because it's a different, there's different elements in it than just your regular everyday like school mass that we did all the time. And you are like meeting these people once, on like one of the most emotional days of their lives. And like I don't have any connection to that person in the casket. But I still do because I'm like here at this moment, which is very important for their soul, Yeah, that was really beautiful. That is awesome. And I would say, over my time as a priest in the Episcopal Church, like I often say, ironically, the most holy moments I've had, and not necessarily in funerals, but in death with people. Yeah. So I feel that. Good. Well, so what else? Any other childhood touchstones? I mean, or adolescence or whatever? I think those are like the big ones. I remember sort of one moment in high school. It was like an Ash Wednesday, which we didn't technically have like any special time off from school, but it was sort of understood that the Catholics would be late that day, or like take a long lunch to go to lunch mass. And I remember I had band class right after lunch, and so like the day before, I told my band director like I'm gonna be late that day. We got to go to mass. And we can't do the early one because of this or the late one because of that. And he was like, "Well, no, there's no excuses for being late." And I was like, well, okay. And there were a bunch of us that came in late to class that day, and it was very clear why, because the cross is on our forehead. Yeah. And I remember him being like upset about it, and sort of in that moment being like, yeah, but that is more important to me than this. Yeah. And band was very important to me in high school. I was a band kid, and I remember that being a moment of like where I made a choice of saying, no, actually, this is very important to me. That's awesome. Yeah. Like the first sort of conscious choice to say this is more than. Yeah. That's cool. Did you get in trouble? Like a little bit, he kind of like made a stink about it, but we all knew there's enough of us coming in, and like, okay, you're gonna put like one tardy on my record, okay? That's funny. Good. Okay. Well, and so at least in terms of like a theme so far, though, what I'm hearing is so the spirituality definitely was through the church, though, for you in your younger years. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And anything else coming through high school up to? What are your other sort of moments? Nothing like major stands out. I remember sort of making a choice at the end of high school, like I could go to I ended up choosing a Catholic college, but the only reason that was important to me was because I wanted to go learn more about the church. You know, like I didn't feel a need to sort of like run away from like a state college or something, or like that because I was Catholic I had to go to a Catholic school. It was really because my oldest brother had gone there, and I had decided to go somewhere else originally, and then he called me and said, you know, I know you and I know this school, I think you'd be a really good fit here. I was like, well, I trust you. Okay.
Yeah. Where was that?
So that was Catholic University out in DC.
Oh, that's right. You said that. That's right.
Yeah, which was great. It was a really rich place to learn and to, like I learned intellectually a lot about the church there. And then it wasn't really until I left and was sort of, you know, working after college to be like, okay, so without that structure of learning a lot about the faith and not everybody, most people there are practicing Catholics, like what is that, what do I want my life to be outside of, you know, without that sort of like built-in infrastructure. And so that's when I was sort of like, okay, I know a lot about the church and the faith, but like, what does that mean day to day?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, well, before we go down that route, so, and I assume you also had, like, you did confirmation and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Was that?
It was like good.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it was a real like.
Yeah, it wasn't this big moment.
Peak moment for me. My sponsor is an excellent woman that I love very much, and who still texts me every year on the confirmation and like tells me how she's praying for me, which is really beautiful. But it was like just sort of another moment, you know what I mean?
Sure. Just was curious. Yeah, no, I feel you. Oftentimes it's those moments that are like built up as supposed to be something that aren't, right? And then it's just like the random Sunday that you're get communion that you're like knocked off your Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, so it sounds like at that point in your life you were, in a way, it was discernment really of like you had this religious education and experience structure as a part of your growing up in your life, and then you were having to discern, are you gonna carry that through into your professional adult life, or not? And if so, then how? Right. Yeah. So what did that end up looking like for you?
It was a really like messy time because that was right around when the information about Cardinal McCarrick came out. I don't know if you know a lot about that. He was a cardinal in the DC area for a long time, but also and he had been a big mover in the church for a long time, but it came out that he had been, for the entirety of his priesthood, been abusing young boys sexually. And so that was a real like moment of reckoning, I think, of like, well, and it made me sort of look back at the rest of my faith and was like, well, I got First Communion, like that moment, which is so important, in 2002, like pretty soon, like right around those Boston scandals first breaking. And so to look back at the entirety of my spiritual life and be like, that has been in the shadow of that for the whole of my like sacramental life in the church, was very painful and like very, I was incredibly angry for like about everything for a very long time. And so the way that I sort of engaged with that, because what I found also very frustrating is like a lot of people I talked to, both in my life, personally, like family and friends, and like read about people writing about the church, was this sense of like, oh, well, like, it's not, we dealt with that already and we don't really need to deal with it again. You know, we already did that in 2002. We don't really have to reckon with it again. Or like, well, it didn't happen in my parish, so I don't really care, kind of thing. Which I think is wrong. And made me angry that like, no, this is part of the body of Christ. Like, you are obligated, I think, to like get mad about it. So what I found to be the most helpful thing, like spiritually in that time, was to write a bunch of poetry about it. Because as I was writing, I was also sort of like figuring out what I actually thought and felt about it, and being able to put it into words and to like take it outside of myself in this way felt very like productive is the wrong word, but you know, yes, yeah, to like have this thing be like, this is how angry I am about it.
Yeah, processing. Yeah. Had you been involved in poetry before that?
Yeah, I wrote a little bit in college and before college, but that was the first major like I am wrestling with this very specifically for this purpose.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for naming that, because I was just, I mean, just to be completely honest, I had that thought as you were talking about how important the church was in your life. And so that thought came into my mind as we were talking earlier, like, I'm like, man, I wonder then when you experience something like that, how deeply that has to affect you. So I just thank you for naming it, because I can't imagine, you know, when spirituality for someone is, as you sort of have outlined, like it's through the lens of the church. It's in involvement in the church is the spiritual life. Right. So then when something like this happens, that's awful and horrible, it has to just like affect everything.
Yeah. And in the course of like all of that writing, I went back and looked, because I was like, I wonder what it was in my diocese growing up, because I didn't really have a big sense of that. And I found out that one of the priests at my parish when I was growing up, like maybe when I was like 2 to 6 kind of age, he had been removed from our parish for that reason. And I remember vaguely, because I remember the priest who came after him very well. We're very good friends still. I remember when that priest left, saying to my mom, like, oh, I'll never love anybody as much as I love him. I'm not going to like this new guy. And to think back at that and be like, oh, man, that, like, I didn't know, you know? And, like, yeah, like, I'm, you know, and I think that was a really helpful moment of, like, this is personal in a way, right? Like, this problem in the church, which is still a problem, is both like personal to each person dealing with it, and also like is a institutional thing as well. And that is like fundamentally the thing of the church, is that it's this institutional thing, and also it is like these people that I go to mass with every week. And so therefore, like, every problem in the church is also both this like individual problem, and we all have to care about it because we are all a part of this institutional. Yeah.
Man, okay, so you start writing poetry, and that sounds like that's helpful for you, and that's And is that something that it continues, I think, till today, right?
Yeah. So I wrote one book about that problem in particular, the sex abuse crisis in the church. And then after I was done with that, I was like, okay, I should probably keep writing, and like maybe it won't all be as painful as that. So I did just have a book out this summer that is also poetry, and some of it is spiritual, but a good chunk of that one is actually the story of Lazarus, and like from different perspectives of so there's a Martha and Mary one, there's a couple about Lazarus, there's a couple about like somebody from the outside witnessing the Lazarus is coming out of the grave.
That's awesome. So it's like it's sort of like Ignatian, like praying with your imagination.
Yes,
right? Like entering the story.
I did a version of the spiritual exercises a couple years ago, and that's what sort of spurred on the first poetry book. I was like, I'd already written a couple things, and then through the spiritual exercises was like, yes, this is like this is what I should be doing right now.
Yeah.
And so, and keeping that praying with your imagination thing has been really beautiful for me, to like sort of follow through and open up a different like version of prayer, you know, that it's not, it's not just liturgical, it's also this openness as well.
Yeah, like experiential. Yeah, you can experience the scripture and the stories in a different way. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm a huge fan of Ignatian practices, and that's for anybody listening. You all can also do the exercises, Saint Ignatian exercises, if you would like. Can people buy your books?
Yes.
Where can they do that?
They are on Amazon. And also, I do have a website that my brother very kindly made for me, which is just MalloryNygard.com.
Nygard is Nygard.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So MalloryNygard.com or Amazon Mallory Nygard.
Mm-hmm.
And the books are?
The first one is called Pelican, which is after the image of the pelican in her piety, where a pelican, if they cannot find enough food for their young, will like use their beak to pierce their own breast and to like feed their children with their own blood, which is very Eucharistic and intense. And then the second one is called Unraveling, which is inspired by Our Lady Undoer of Knots, which is one of my favorite Marian titles. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I hope people check that out. So it sounds to me like then this. Would you say that the poetry and the Ignatian practices were like your first taste of, I don't know, spiritual experiences, spirituality outside of liturgical church life?
I don't know about first, but definitely like the richest and like most fruitful, and the thing that I keep returning to over and over again. And I think. Yeah, I mean, and it's also the thing that I think it feels sort of like inspired by or like coming out from my experience like liturgically in the church, but it doesn't feel 100% like dependent on that. You know what I mean? There is a sort of a separation there, which I think is probably healthy. Of like, yes, they're connected, but they're not. It's not like a codependent kind of thing happening there.
The codependent what? Say a little more about that.
Well, it's like it's the kind of thing where if I feel like, man, I'm not getting a lot out of where when the liturgy feels very rote and very like, yes, okay, we're doing this again, kind of feeling to it, then I can go to the poetry and say like, okay, but what is there here, and where can I find something that I didn't notice before? Yeah.
Awesome. What this might be a hard question.
That's okay.
But like, what guides you in that? Like when you're doing poetry, is it?
Yeah.
It sounds like, I mean, at least for the books, it was topical. It was things you were experiencing and going through in life. But like now, as you say, you keep returning to that, and it's like a more regular part of your practice in a way. Like what do you find guides you there? That's
a good question that I think I'm answering now, and so I do not have an answer to that.
That's okay.
Because after Unraveling came out, I did feel this sense of like, okay, I don't know, I've sort of done the big topics, you know what I mean, and I don't know what else I have in me that can be brought out in that way. So one thing I found really helpful is like a community of other writers. I have friends. We met initially on Twitter and have been meeting over Zoom every month for like 3 years. So we like that consistency, and those people who, when I bring them a poem and they're like, okay, but what about this? And it sounds like you're getting here, but you're not there yet. So having people who know me and my writing is very helpful. But also I've just started doing The Artist's Way. Do you know that book?
I'm aware of it.
By Julia Cameron. Yes. Where she sort of posits that everybody is creative and there are ways to unlock that and open that up. So I'm really looking forward to that because it's a spiritual path to creativity or through creativity. And I'm not sure where that's going to go for me yet.
That's fascinating. That I hadn't thought about. I know I'm aware of that book. I haven't read it, but I didn't consider this until you just brought this up, that in a way her premise about creativity and about art is sort of what I'm doing with this podcast.
Yeah.
And it's really sort of what I am doing. I feel, I don't know if parishioners would say this, but I feel like I'm doing this in preaching and teaching all the time. And like I'm trying to say, all of you are spiritual beings. You have, and you all have the ability to connect to God in your own ways. And so like, let's go on a journey of finding like, how do we do that?
Right.
And how does each of you do that?
And I think like, I think when you go back to the beginning of what we were talking about, and you were saying there's not a lot of should, or there can be a lot of should in the church,
for a lot of people.
Yes. And I do think like, especially in the liturgical tradition, there's a lot of shoulds. And I think as I write more and as I like teach children a lot, I am trying as much as possible to let go of those shoulds because they mostly get in the way.
Yeah, and they're mostly nonsense.
Yeah. And like, and it might be true like for you, sir, Steve or whatever, but just because it works for you doesn't mean, and like it's possible to have a different path towards God that for each person, right? Like there is a unique relationship with God, and I can't live anybody else's relationship. I can only do my thing.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you've listened to any of these episodes, but that's the what I keep using to say sort of that is languages. I see them as like languages that God uses to communicate with people in different ways. And it's sort of about finding what is that language for you, or what are those languages. And I find to the baggage part and the shame, the guilt stuff, or the shoulds, I find that's like the main barrier that people have to even beginning that process. Because they can't see beyond the should to then start considering like, oh, well, I do actually have a personal relationship with God somehow. And what is that? How does that take shape? They can't even get there because they're just trying to perform and check off the box and earn heaven, you know?
Yeah. I think that's why I'm really fascinated with stories of saints, which the church has so many of them. But I have found, and maybe that's me bringing my own stuff to it, but I have found that they're often used as a should, right? You should be doing it like this person. You should be doing it like this person.
Yeah, definitely.
And that like just does not work for me. Yeah. Like I am not, like a medieval nun, you know? I am not like Saint Ignatius. I am not, and I think that like when I sort of step back from it and I'm like, no, they're just telling this one story, this one example, and you can treat it as like as a blueprint if that works for you, but like, or it could just be a nice story of somebody who figured out what worked for them.
Yeah, inspiration.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Well, with that sort of languages thing, I mean, so it sounds to me like so far, in a way, outside of the church, your creativity for you is like this space where you are listening to God, discerning.
Right. When I am doing it.
You're all correct.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
When you're doing the poetry, when you're doing the creativity, is that what you mean?
Yeah, because I think even, and maybe, I think that there are shoulds even in creativity, right? And even in like poetry, and I have to remind myself of that too, of like, well, this. Right, that's a should from somebody else.
Yeah, right.
Or from like your own brainworms, and you don't need that one. Yeah, you can keep going.
Are you meaning like sort of like structure of poem, like that kind of stuff? Like, oh no, I need to. Yeah. I should tie it up in this way, or I should.
Right.
It needs to be in this meter.
Yeah, or I've been finding that I can't really get myself out of a cliche recently. Like the first the first thing that comes to my head is a cliche, and I don't write it down because it's a cliche and that's dumb. It's like, well, okay, it is dumb, but it's your first idea, and ideas are better than nothing. So just put it down.
And cliches are cliches because they're real.
Right. And like you can work it into a thing.
Yeah.
And I think sort of as I'm working my way through the artist's way, like that, just the reminder of like, yes, like it's to create is like better than nothing, right? Like when you think back to the creation story, something out of nothing, and that is good. And it doesn't have to be like excellent. The creating itself is good. And like that, and focus on that.
Yeah, you're making me think about just in my own life of creativity and then thinking about like, I wonder what that's like for people who never experienced that. Like I don't know, I'm sort of just blabbing, but like makes me think of like, so like I go through that process. I would say a similar process. I can't assume, I don't know what that's like for you, but sermons are that for me. And there's this like, I can't even put words around it. It's like a deep, like a welling up. It's like a deep, like something within me that like you fight with and you struggle and you like put it out there, and then you just release it and you're like, okay, there's that thing. There it went. The only frustrating part about sermons is like, unlike a book of poetry or someone's painting or whatever, like it can live. Like the sermon just goes. Yeah. And it's gone, and you got to do another one next week.
That is something I think I sort of fought with a lot at the beginning of poetry, is this idea of like, well, if the only people who ever read it are like me and God, like, is that enough?
Yeah.
And I think I am at a point where I can say, yes, that is enough. If the only people who read it are me and God, okay. Like, it was still good to create. He knows it. Like, it, even if I keep writing poetry and nobody else ever reads it, it's still good for me to write the poetry, but that like a sense of like ephemeralness, right? Like, well, then what is the point? Well, the point is the doing it, not the outcome at the end. Although that is also like something good to aim for. The point is the doing it, which is hard. It's hard to let that go.
Yes, I imagine, especially if you start like publishing or like that can very easily then start to feel like something else. Right. The motivation can become different. And so you're sort of putting yourself in check again. Your why. Okay, so what else would you name in Mallory's life of, so I that feels to me like you brought us up to now. And so what is spiritual life for you outside of, I mean, is mainly creativity, it sounds like, church, creativity. Are there other avenues or other things that are big or important in your life? Ways, I guess we could frame it in that language way, like other ways that God speaks to you.
Yeah, that's a great question that my spiritual director asked me every month. Yes, I would say like besides poetry, like the main like challenge every day, in order not to find God, but to like notice him where he is presently in amongst me, is like with the children that I work with. You know what I mean? Like to say, to not think of them as sort of children in general, but to be like, this kid right here whose name is Steve. I don't think there's any Steves in my school. Like, this kid is loved by God right now. And like, am I getting in the way of that? Or am I like recognizing and honoring that and like treating him like that? That is very hard.
Oh yeah. I call that black belt stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, I do a lot of talking about, it's funny because it sounds like the easiest spiritual practice, and yet it's the hardest. It's and we call it's the hidden Christ, right? So like, to try to actually see every single person that you encounter every day, and as you're interacting with them, to say, I recognize the Christ in them.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's black belt stuff.
Yeah, and
Zen Buddhist, it's
there's like I see maybe 80 kids a day, and like also like I have a job to do, like
Right.
there's paperwork and there's emails and there's scanning books and and sometimes I'm like,
I don't
you're
like that kid.
you're being a real turd right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And to like not let that build up either, because I think it is an unrealistic goal for myself to say, well, I am gonna see God in every one of those kids every day.
Right.
No, but I can like recognize that in a couple kids every day, hopefully, right? And even before that, like going to school and being open to seeing God in all of those
just
kids
holding
every
that
day.
intention in life.
Yeah, sometimes that is not easy.
No, not at all. Yeah. But what a beautiful, holy thing.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And it's very, I guess, incarnational. I mean, it's just something that frustrates me. I don't know if you see this in the Catholic culture or community. And I'm not at all assuming this is an Episcopalian thing or denominational. It's probably just Christianity or just people, right? Yeah. But like so much of it is focused on like afterlife or being good for God or whatever, and then people fail to then bring it out into the world, like actually experience God here and now. Right. To even look for it. Right.
Yeah, I don't remember who told me this. I can't remember if it was like a friend or if I like heard it on a podcast or something. But they said that like the point of like they said confession, the sacrament of confession in particular, but really like sacramental, liturgical, spiritual life on earth now is to enjoy a relationship with God now.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily only about heaven or hell or like like if somebody writes a hagiography of you as a saint later. It's not about that. It's about like, do you enjoy being loved by God right now? Right. And like, on the one hand, that is incredibly freeing, to be like, I actually do not decide if I go to heaven or hell. That's on God, and I am not God. But like, can I be open to enjoying, not just experiencing, but enjoying a relationship with God today, like right now?
Yeah, the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
here.
Right.
Yeah. But we get obsessed with these like afterlife things.
Right.
Which I don't actually think Jesus was really talking about that most of the time.
Yeah, and also I see that in my school of like, well, like we're preparing you for high school, or we're preparing you for middle school, or we're preparing you for college. It's like, well, yeah, but also like you're a third grader right now, and you get to enjoy being a third grader right now.
Yep. That's funny. Yeah, be here and now, right? Be present. Yeah. It's funny, I heard a guy talking about this. He was some sort of like, I don't know, guru dude, I don't know, meditational. And he said, we were always talking about time travel and if it could exist. And he said, it already does exist. He said, most people are either holding on to things that happened to them. Yeah. Or they're worrying about things that are going to happen or they want or desire. Right. And so they're not living in present. They are living truly in their minds in the past or in the future. Yeah. And I thought that was a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is like very, I don't want to say like natural, but I do think it is sort of like reinforced by everything around us of like, you got to be dealing with stuff from the past and you have to be preparing for the future. And like, if you're not planning out your whole life, then like you're doing things wrong. And I think it is harder for me to let go and just say, okay, but I'm just going to live right now. But when I do that, it is such a better experience. It's like, oh yeah, this is actually where I'm happiest is right here and now, not worrying about things that I cannot control in 3 months or 3 years.
Yep, take that breath. and
Right.
center in the moment. What else?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's great. I mean, the thing. So again, creativity, liturgical space, church life, creativity, expression of that, and then you're trying the black belt stuff of being noticing God's presence in these beautiful children. And I should say, what a gift that they have someone like you in their life in their school, right? That is actually attempting to love them in that way. That's beautiful. That's great.
Yeah, thank you. It's yeah, it is not always easy.
Oh, I know.
But when in those moments where it does like work, oh man, those are the best. You know what I mean? Like when you like connect with a kid and you're like, hey, I love you, and I see that connect in their head, then it's like, yes, this this like really worked. Yeah.
That's awesome. Would you, not to put on your spiritual director's hat, but so are there other languages you would name of how God speaks to you, or?
Well, I think probably the other like really big one which is really an extension of like the trying to see every child, is also like the relationships with my family and friends, of trying to both love them exactly as who they are and not want to change everything about them. And also like having the trust and the faith in them to be fully myself with them. I think that really is.
That second one's rough, huh?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
To be our true selves.
Right. And I think like that is probably will be the like I don't want to say like the problem, but like the thing that I do, that I wrestle with for the whole of my life. Like I don't think that is a problem to be solved.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's lifelong journey.
Yeah.
That makes me think of Enneagram work. I don't know if you've gotten into
a
that
little
at
bit.
all.
Yeah.
There's
I think I'm a 5.
So
the last time I took it.
Yeah. So I'm a 9, and there's this one, you just reminded me, there's this line, there's this beautiful, I shouldn't even say this on here without knowing the information, but there's a guy, an artist a musician.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
So he did a whole, each number
and
has a song.
They're so beautiful.
Oh, they're gorgeous.
Yeah.
But on the 9, so I'm assuming this is sort of particularly a 9 thing, but you just reminded me of it. There's a line where he says, to know and love yourself is the most difficult and meaningful work you'll ever do. To fully know and love yourself, is the most difficult and meaningful work you'll ever do.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh!
Okay. Yeah. Because I think I think that's just an extension from knowing and loving others, like my favorite book is Les Mis, and there's a line in there, to love another person is to see the face of God. But like that is an extension of like to yourself as well, right? Like if you're going to extend this love and like mercy and forgiveness probably to other people, like you also have to do that for yourself.
Yeah.
It's like, it turns out I'm also a person that has to be, like loved and loved by God.
And that sort of circles back to what we're talking about with the shoulds and the guilt stuff. And it really is. I mean, I know we sort of, just to speak of it in those terms doesn't even do it justice. I mean, it is such a difficult and lifelong journey of, if we have to get out of our own way in order to like experience God in that way.
Right.
Like, I'm not even putting that into words well, but like.
Yeah, my lock screen right now is a quote that says, like, life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And I think that really, like, speaks to this thing of even the shoulds and even, like, loving yourself and other people. Like, that's not something that even one day after a lot of work, you wake up and you're like, I'm good now.
Yeah.
I figured it out.
Right.
And which I think sort of goes, the creativity is really like what that is for me. Because sometimes I get to a point where I feel like, well, I'm never writing another poem. I've done all the ones I can do, and I don't have any ideas, and I don't care, and I just am nothing. And it's like, well, that's how I'm feeling today, and I know that's not true.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like almost 30. I'm gonna write more poetry.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of time left to do that.
Right.
And I think
you just started. Yeah.
It's this like cyclical thing of, boy, some days I don't feel connected to God, and some days I don't feel like I can love people very well. But that's today, and maybe tomorrow it'll be a little different.
Yeah, when you said that's what you're doing in the poetry, did you mean that's you through the poetry and the creativity somehow you are learning to love and accept yourself as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that's what you meant. But yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a really good way to see that.
Yeah. It's this way of both like looking at myself from the outside, right? To like put it down on paper and to say, okay, this is something true about me. Because the thing about poetry is that it lives in the truth of things. I cannot write poetry that just is not true. Right. And so to write it out is like vulnerable and scary because it's true and it's out there. But then it also makes it a real thing that you cannot hide from anymore. And there's ultimately no point in hiding from the truth because like God is already present.
Right. God knows already.
Yeah.
That's such a great and neat analogy. Yeah. It's making me think about how just, I don't know, we like if I try to sort of dissect and analyze sort of what we're saying in the church all the time, I sort of break it down in terms like we're telling people, hey, love other people and be good to other people because God loves you, right? And is good to you, right? Forgive because you have been forgiven. But then there's that other layer that we're talking about now that isn't often talked about, that most people go, oh, okay, sure, I've been loved, but probably because they haven't done a lot of that internal work of loving and accepting themselves, they can't even get to the step of experiencing God loving and accepting them.
Right. Yeah. And then which ultimately gets in the way of you loving other people.
Exactly.
But
we never go into that space and talk about
because
that self-work.
To go into your like inner self and be like, oh, is very vulnerable and is like painful and scary and in a way like dangerous. You don't really know what you're going to find in there because you've been avoiding it for a long time.
I put that thing away a long time ago. I don't even remember what it is.
Exactly. And like you don't know what's going to happen when it comes out. But I will say like more often than not, and like proportionately like 98% of the time, it is better for me to have pulled that out, you know, and to look at it and to be like, well, what is really going on here and where does that come from and like, is it true?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And to like hold it up to God and say like, is this true? Because if it is true, I'm in danger. And if it's not true, like, can I let it go?
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. Not to put it back in the Enneagram stuff, but that's how I describe that for people is like, I always tell people, don't take a test. Read about the numbers, and you'll know which one it is because it'll hurt.
Yeah.
and that's that hard but beautiful journey of self-growth, right? It's like, oh my gosh, this is real, and this is maybe ugly, and it hurts, and I don't like it, and yet it's the naming it, right? That releases that. Or just the knowledge of like, okay, to use your example, like, God, is this true? And if the answer is yes, like, there's a lot of power just in knowing that. Right. Like, okay, well, this is a part of me.
Right. And I
know this.
I probably one day will need to like deal with that.
Yeah, sure.
But like maybe today, all I need to do is say like, oof, okay. okay.
That's the first step, right?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Man.
Yeah. But let me say, I am really grateful for that work that I have done. Because I think I am much more comfortable in who I am now, and also I am more confident that God loves me exactly as I am currently, and also my relationships with my friends and family are richer and better now for having done that. Very painful and hard work. Yeah,
that makes sense to me. And what a gift, though, that for most people to do that work, they're probably going to therapy, what a beautiful thing that you were able to somehow naturally.
Well, I have been to therapy.
Yeah, well,
I will say my therapist is great.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yes, but it is not just the therapy. It is also the and I do credit a lot of that to this really solid foundation of growing up in the church and having language to ask those questions, right? Knowing true things about who God is to be able to say, well, okay, is this true in my life as well? And to, that is such a integral part of it. I was thinking that, during 2020, we were closed for school for a few months. And so and that was right after I moved here. So I did not know anybody. So I was mostly by myself for 6 months. Great and terrible. And there was some time, especially in that moment, where I was reckoning with do I want to stay in the church and do the work of being Catholic? Or is there some way for me to get out of it, kind of thing? And there, as I sort of looked at that part of myself, it felt like to not be a part of the church would be to have my skeleton removed from my body. That just doesn't make sense,
It comes across even in this conversation. I mean, that has been part of your foundational makeup.
Right. Yeah. If you were to take that part out of me, I just would not make sense as a human. And so that was a really freeing moment of oh yeah, okay, so if I'm in this for the rest of my life, then I do get to decide sort of how that works for me and how that and where in this huge expansive capital C church that encompasses space and time and the globe, there's room in there for me. And that I don't have to fit into some certain very specific kind of box.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. What anything else you would name? I want to be conscious of your time here. Anything else you would name in your life of ways God speaks to you, or of spiritual moments? Something I ask everyone at the end of every podcast is, what has been the most significant or powerful spiritual experience you've ever had?
Yeah. No, I don't have a lot of mountaintop kind of moments. I will say probably the one of the moments where I go back to and say this was a really decisive moment for me was the funeral mass of my grandmother for my grandfather, because I was not able to go to my grandmother's funeral. She passed away my senior year of college after a pretty short battle with pancreatic cancer. And then just a few months later, my grandfather died. I think of a broken heart, he just was ready to not be without my grandmother. And because of timing and stuff, I was taking my big comprehensive final exams when my grandmother's funeral was happening, so I couldn't fly home for that, but I was able to go to my grandfather's funeral. And to be there, with my family, and it felt like this extension of all those funerals I had served as a kid, you know, to be like, yes, like I really do believe all of this stuff, you know, like this makes sense to me, and it also like logically makes sense to me, right? But also like I feel this here, it like with these people that I love and know so well and who know and love me, and like this is what I want for my life, this here, and that that's sort of the moment that I keep going back to and being like, this, when it is hard, it is also very good.
Yeah,
you know,
it's that weird space, right? It's
right.
Like, it takes death sometimes for us to experience that that real love and life.
Yeah, and it, you know, like I feel very grateful that I knew my grandparents for as long as I did, and I knew that they loved me, and you know, and I knew that they had their own spiritual experiences, and it felt like this real gift to be like, okay, and now I know that like they will be praying for me for the rest of my life in a very real way. And I remember thinking like, man, I am very sad, and also I'm so happy for them, you know, to like to be joined now with God in love for the rest of time. Okay, great. You know, like yeah, like I had this moment of being like, I don't want you back, because I know that, or I guess I hope that where you are now is so overwhelmingly love that that I don't want you back here, you know. Yeah, and I felt afterwards for a long time pretty I guess I don't really know the right word, but I don't know. I could feel them praying for me in a way. Not, you know, in like words or anything like that, but just like I felt their love in a different way after they died than I did when they were alive. And that was a really like beautiful moment for me of being like, yeah, like this is, I get this now.
Yeah. I think that's it. Thank you for sharing that. And that was great. And it's interesting because I think that's something, the connection to ancestors is something that's not talked about. I won't go into these stories here now, but I mean, I have similar experiences or feelings or senses. But it is curious because it's not even, I'm assuming, like, I don't know that that's something talked about or taught about in Christianity even, right?
Right.
I mean, it makes me think of like Japanese sort of practice. So I just find it curious.
Yeah,
I think it's something that's very real for people.
Yeah.
But yet it's not something that is.
And it's something that I have experienced like with the saints, right? Like I would say with the canonized.
That's like the closest
saints.
thing we come to an example of
yeah.
that. Right.
But they're like, but in the Catholic Church there are like two kinds of saints, I guess, like the official canonized ones, you know what I mean? And then everybody in heaven. Right. And that was a real like sense of comfort for me of being like, well, my grandparents are never going to be like canonized saints, right? But I am pretty confident, that feels very arrogant, but I am pretty confident that they are both in heaven.
Yeah.
And like, oh, they're also saints. So like, oh, okay. Like it helped me understand, I think a little bit of what we talked about of how the church is both personal and like universal. Yeah. You know, of like
the closest thing, I mean, the Episcopal Church is funny for lots of reasons, but like, so some Episcopal churches will seem very Catholic, right? In terms of many things, but for the example of saints, some Episcopalians very much have the understanding and relationship of saints that you just laid out. Some, it's a very foreign thing for them. But the other thing that makes me think of that we do say and teach, which is very similar, is the belief that when we are joined in the Eucharist,
Right.
that so it doesn't matter if it's just you and me.
Right.
It's the entire body of saints.
Yes,
right? It's
exactly.
the saints in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to that extent, then it's like, yeah, of course your ancestors are
Right.
with you, right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, actually, that's everybody
Yeah,
who's like ever been Catholic.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, it is this real sense of, like I'm a part of something so big and deep and wide and yeah.
Awesome. Anything else you want to name for us today?
I will give a plug for a song that I've been loving lately, called Universal Sound by Tyler Childers. That one has been a great, like meditation for me lately.
Yeah, it is a
like,
cool one.
oh.
It doesn't get a lot of people don't notice that one.
Yeah.
Tyler Childers is awesome, and I love him,
Yes.
and I love that song myself, because it is like, he like goes into this spiritual sort of theological place.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. I agree. Good call.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if there's not anything else, then I want to thank you for, again, coming and journeying with me and sitting with somebody you don't know and talking about these things. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.
And I know you didn't come here to plug your books, but why don't you tell people, again, your name and where they can find your works?
Sure. So my name is Mallory Nygard, and my books are called Pelican and Unraveling. They are both on Amazon, if you search my name. And also I have a website, which is Mallory Nygard, nygard.com. They're
Awesome.
both on there.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mallory. Good to be with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.